I hear a lot of people saying the blues, but I'm gonna tell you what the blues is. When you ain't got no money, you got the blues. When you ain't got no money to pay your house, you still got the blues.
Welcome to this installment of Blind Eggs and Ham, a podcast discussing the visually impaired world from my perspective. In today's installment, being my first, I'd like to tell you about me and my visually impaired life. And today's story is the $1 Million Brake Job. This is where the story of my life begins. To start, I'm Jason. Today's installment was recorded on March 18th, 2019, and I'm 43 years old. I was by trade an IT tech with over 10 years of solid IT help desk support and field support services, as well as building thousands of servers. I'm dad of 2 kids, the husband of a loving and forgiving wife. I used to have a really nice Nissan Xterra and a really fast Suzuki Bandit, and I took the kids for rides on whenever the weather was above 50 degrees. Going back to my 39th year of life, things finally seemed to be going well. In July 2015, the company I was working with had offered me a lucrative weekend position that gave me 3 days off a week. Then 2 days at home, 2 days at the office, or 4 10-hour days. My family and I had our vacation, and our family trip was up to Mount Major in Alton, New Hampshire. During my vacation, my Xterra started to develop a brake issue, and the pads needed to be replaced and eventually the rotors. After procrastinating a week or 2, maybe 3, the core of the brake pad had become wedged in the brake rotor and then came out the side. My wife insisted that I take it to the shop. I insisted on taking it to the mother-in-law's garage for a do-it-yourself afternoon. After several hours of cursing, banging my hands, and soothing my literal wounds, I decided it would be best to put things back together and call a tow truck and let the family mechanic deal with the issue. Well, I'll admit I got the stink eye by my mechanic in a speech being told to stick with fixing computers, and that's the clean version. My wife put her 2 cents worth in as well. I have no choice but to admit shame and defeat on this one. A week or 2 later, toward the beginning of August 2015, I started the new shift and came down with what also seemed to be the typical August cold or flu that I got almost every year. I got a fever, took Tylenol to lower it, and tried to ride it out. Over the next couple weeks, things got worse. I began vomiting. I threw my back out. I stopped being able to use the toilet properly. My back hurt like a son of a bitch, and I was losing weight quickly. In October 2015, I ended up going to the emergency room with the pain of the likes I had never experienced before. My wife and I thought it was a stomach flu that wouldn't leave, and popping my back out from vomiting. Well, those are the problems going on, or at least that's what we convinced ourselves of the narrative to that point. I got to the emergency room. The pain was incredible. After spending the night getting the pain under control and getting the trifecta of expensive CT scans, MRIs, and lab tests, it was determined that I had an infection in my spine, and it was felt that it was caught early enough. The infection was MSSA, or methicillin susceptible Staphylococcus aureus. It was eating away at the bone at my spine at T11 and 12. This was confirmed by an interventional CT that was a needle guided into my spine, and they withdrew infectious matter. Getting it under control was important, as paralysis and so forth could be real issues in the near future. I spent 6 days in the hospital and left with a PICC line and antibiotics around the clock. I was out of work for a couple of weeks. I started back at work and made it through the holidays and the new year. I got rid of the PICC line in mid-December, the day of the Christmas party. Man, was I a man traveling to Lebanon for the company party. I had a bunch of work accommodations thrown around to help me get back to my 40 hours on the weekend. By April, things were literally going down the shitter. My ears were having a hard time processing sound. Sounds were unusually loud, and I had developed an issue in my right eye, notably a change in my vision. That alarmed my alternate PCP. It seemed that my blood pressure was causing my retinas to pop. They called this papilledema, and my vision had started to deteriorate. In my right eye, I also had an abnormally narrow optic disc. I ended up back in the local hospital for a couple of nights and transferred to a major hospital that could help me beyond pain control. I was now on a roller coaster to save my life. My blood pressure was dangerously high. The pain was out of control. I was vomiting out of control. My ears were exploding with sound, and I was septic. We left one hospital for another around 11 p.m. and got to the other emergency room after an hour's drive north, which was delayed by vomiting. I went in for the first of two major surgeries on April 12, 2016, and a second the next day. My first surgery was 13 hours long, and during that surgery, I had a T11 and 12 corpectomy, or in layman's terms, the removal of the vertebral matter infected with staph A. During that surgery, my kidneys had failed and shut down. This was thought to be a side effect of the NSAID use and MRI contrast from several other MRIs prior to my surgeries. During the second surgery, which was around 7 hours, as well as during the first surgery, I received a combined total of 22 liters of fluid and blood for fluid resuscitation. I went from 269 pounds to 340 pounds just from fluid retention. I spent 10 days in the ICU, 4 of those days intubated. Some of those days were on dialysis. I had tubes and sensors coming out of various parts of my chest and spinal area. These surgeries were considered life-saving. I have an incision from just below my left shoulder blade that goes around to my side just before my belly button. Another incision down my back from just below my shoulder blades to just above my belt line. In total, this was to remove the T11 and 12 vertebral bodies, remove the 11th rib to access those vertebral bodies. They lowered my diaphragm, they deflated my lung. And of those 2 surgeries, they installed 2 11-inch rods, a 5-inch rod, a couple of screws, a screw cage, a bunch of hooks, and they took that rib and ground it up and packed it around the cage with some bone putty. And for good measure, they did a thoracic debridement to clean out the infection in my chest cavity. During the surgeries, my optic nerves are believed to have stroked out, leaving me with blurry vision. In addition to the missing fields of vision that I had before the surgeries. During my 18-day hospital stay, my esophagus became damaged. One hospital stated it looked like a loss of blood supply. Another says it looked like a chemical burn. 36 surgeries later, 4 months of liquid-only diet, and cases of ensuring Gatorade, as well as a year's recovery, I could swallow some things again, on top of recovery from surgeries 1 and 2. During the quest to understand why my digestive system had shut down, I underwent a serial dilatation to open up my esophagus, as well as a colonoscopy during the same anesthesia slot. This is known as a GI handshake, prior to which I was required to take on a gallon's worth of Miralax, water, and salts to flush out my system. Thus, having added 12 pounds in a few hours, along with profound nausea while getting the lavage fluid down, my body damaged my optic nerves again and permanently damaged my visual system. This last stage of damage caused my vision to resemble looking out while underwater. I have missing fields of vision in both eyes. In my right eye, I have a large bean-shaped scotoma in my central vision. I am unable to read or track with my right eye in central vision. In my left eye, I have no sense of light at the top or a dense scotoma extending from the 11 o'clock position down through the center to 4 o'clock. Everything else is blurry, save a sweet spot at 7 o'clock from the center. This is where I can still use the phone, which is normally a few inches from my face, and with some general navigation on a PC with NVDA and a really large screen. What I can't read from the text on the screen, NVDA will read for me. The official diagnosis from two neuro-ophthalmologists are NAION, or non-arteritic ischemic optic neuropathy, bilateral optic nerve damage, abnormally narrow optic discs, arcuate-retinal thinning, and it's as if this wasn't enough, I can't tolerate lighting. My right eye, being useless except for the periphery, is often involuntarily closed in ambient lighting. I have to keep my living condition as close to a dusk level as I can, and I wear sunglasses when I'm not in bed or napping. This means that my color vision is way off in both eyes, and trying to read normally is difficult due to the missing fields. I don't perceive depth well, I lose acuity in bright light. In outside lighting, I have no usable vision a few moments of bright lights. This will usually result in a headache that starts off like a brain freeze behind the eyes, which is just above my nasal passages. If I don't deploy some sort of protection, this will progress to a full-blown migraine. Where I can, I deploy a blindfold. At night, a single point of light is prismed into at least 3 or more points of light, and it becomes dazzling when you add in street lights, signs, as well as other points of light. Each prism point, which is usually 3 or more, look like a radiation symbol coming from each source of light. I really tried to deny that this was happening to me, but I couldn't deny being attached to my wife's arm while we were out walking, and at that time I was using a support cane, so a white cane wasn't necessary. But after a month or so, I was getting frustrated with taking out clothing racks and fixtures at the local mall or the local supermarket. And this was in sighted guide mode. I found that I could order a white cane online, and I tried to wing it. This was until walking through our open living room, I neglected to see my son's backpack on the floor and took it out with my right foot, breaking my right pinky toe. It was at this point I realized how dangerous things had become, and I realized I needed help and sought out orientation and mobility training, because being attached to my wife's arm like a helpless baby wasn't going to be my thing. My first spring of getting to know my cane was with Future Insight in New Hampshire for orientation and mobility training, and this probably saved my life. After a few months of trying to increase my walking ability and stamina, I was able to walk to my mailbox unassisted. This was during the day with my white cane, 350 feet north up our road to the top of the hill to our mailbox. I'm pretty sure I gave the wife a heart attack telling her what I did that day, but after the initial shock wore off, I think she was a bit more congratulatory. During this time, after discussing things with my neuro-ophthalmologist during the February 2017 follow-up appointment, it was discussed that I needed to surrender my driver's license. And I did so on the last day of February 2017. My daughter was with me to help me with the paperwork and to provide the moral support that I needed. I was told by my friends I did this with grace, but this really felt like a gut punch. I continued to work to make my spinal muscles and legs stronger. My wife would often take me to the Franklin Falls Dam in Franklin, New Hampshire. It's a 1 3/4 walk on paved road. Here, I could practice my cane skills safely. And eventually I was able to make it beyond the first quarter mile, and then to the next sitting area, then to the bottom of the floodgate road that's open to the public. By the end of that summer, I was able to walk again 2 miles. My wife and I were invited to a wedding in Florida in January 2018. This was my first big boy travel as a visually impaired cane user. I found it hard to get around the hotel and found Sighted Guide to be an efficient way to get around. Really, I had no need to explore. In the spring of 2018, April to be more specific, I was invited to the Lions Club Blind and Visually Impaired Social Weekend in Nashua, New Hampshire. I had accepted this invitation, having declined the year before. This was a turning point in my evolution as a visually impaired person. While on my own, away from my wife, I had to put to use my cane skills. I was lost until I had a fellow cane traveler explain to me how to shore the floor to get to the service desk. From there, I would learn where everything else was in the hotel. I also got to meet my soon-to-be friend, Thomas. I was invited to his place in Concord, and he showed me an entirely new angle on white cane travel. I was learning to navigate downtown Concord with my cane. After a while, I got comfortable with shopping at the market basket on my own with store assistance. I joined the YMCA in Concord and began working out. Fast forward a year, it's spring of 2019, and I'm separated from my wife and now live in downtown Concord. We separated in the fall. I'm now classified as an intermediate white cane user, with the intentions on working towards earning a dog. But clearly that is a gloss over of me and my medical adventures, and there are more gory details I could share. But for now, this is enough. I will end this installment with a moral of the story. If your wife tells you not to fix the car, you probably should listen to her. She's probably right. In this case, it ended up being $1 million brake job that changed my life.